talk about child marriage and even forced marriages, which is quite predominant in most countries, including Nigeria. I also know that you have forced conversion and marriage of girls in Pakistan as well. Tell us, what are the stories that you have come across and how can this be dealt with, especially from the minority groups?
That's a great question. I had the distinct honor of speaking on a webinar with the Chingari Project and the Gold Institute, I think it was in December or January, where we highlighted the community of Sind. It's the same situation nearly that occurs in some areas of Nigeria, where you see religious groups kind of dispersing into different parts of the country instead of being able to live pluralistically in a multi-faith way, which is what we advocate for. So in the particular region of Sindh in Pakistan, we see that the Christians actually don't have the ability to raise their voice in the government system. There's no political representation for them. And then what we're seeing is forced conversion and marriage of young girls in that area. Sindh is a predominantly Christian area, so we're under the understanding that sometimes these girls are even ripped away from their homes. And then what we see is that the laws are not being activated, they're not being imposed. So these crimes go just unprosecuted, and girls are married off to sometimes Muslim men who are even polygamists, and then forced converted into a different faith. And what we would like to see is representation for the minority community, which we understand in Pakistan is only 4% of the population. So it seems more of an uphill battle in that region than a place like Nigeria, where I believe the statistic is 54% Muslim, the rest Christian. It's almost half and half. So I think Nigeria is in a much better position to be able to provide that sort of care and integrate communities in a resilient, pluralistic way.
Mark Heathquirk, he is an authority on Bible prophecy and an authority, once said, "The greatest danger to the church today is not humanism, paganism, atheism, or agnosticism. The greatest danger is not increasing hostility against our faith from the culture. Our greatest danger is apostasy on the inside, arising from false teachers, theological liberals who deny and distort biblical doctrine and lead others down the same path." Wow, that's a lengthy one. Our next quote is from John Stott, who is an English Anglican cleric and a theologian who was noted as a leader of the worldwide evangelical movement. He once said, "The essence of apostasy is changing sides from that of the crucified to that of the crucifier." Wow. And our last one is from Jalal al-Adin Muhammad Rumi, who is a 13th century poet and Islamic scholar. He once said, "Christian, Jew, Muslim, shaman, Zoroastrian, stone, ground, mountain, river, each has a secret way of being with the mystery, unique and not to be judged." Absolutely spot on. Now let's see how this quote relates to what we will be discussing today. Very warm greetings and welcome to The Conversation. We are reaching you from KAFTAN's television studio here in the nation's capital, Abuja. I am Annabel Orji. On today's episode of The Conversation, we'll continue our series on blasphemy and apostasy laws. Now, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, apostasy is the total rejection of Christianity by a baptized person who, having at one time professed the Christian faith publicly and rejects it. It is distinguished from heresy, which is limited to the rejection of one or more Christian doctrines by one or who maintains an overall adherence to Jesus Christ. Now, on the other hand, the Merriam Dictionary defines blasphemy as, that's in religious sense, that it refers to the great disrespect shown to God or to something holy, or to something said or done that shows that this kind of disrespect. Heresy refers to a belief or opinion that does not agree with the official belief or opinion of a particular religion. So that's exactly where our conversation today is headed with my guest, of course, Dr. Christine Sequenzia. She is an experienced government relations and biblical justice professional. She is a fierce advocate, impassioned speaker, and fervent friend of the exploited and marginalized. She has traveled to over 15 countries, including to serve refugees in the MENA region and sex trafficking survivors in Central America. She finds joy in serving the oppressed by galvanizing multi-faith and multidisciplinary terms towards strategic domestic and foreign diplomacy. Currently, Dr. Christine serves as the co-chair of the International Religious Freedom Campaign to eliminate blasphemy and apostasy laws. While my second guest on the show today is Soraya Deen, a lawyer, author, and founder of the Muslim Women Speakers. She is an award-winning international interfaith activist, community organizer, and motivational speaker, a fierce advocate of human rights, gender equality and equity, redressing religious-based oppression, dominance, and violence, minority rights. And Soraya is a member of the International Religious Freedom Roundtable, that's IRF Roundtable, and co-founder of the Women's Working Group. I have two powerful guests, definitely, and two female powerful guests. So it's going to be a fully loaded package on the show today. Do well not to miss this part of the show. So we're going on this quick break, and when we return, we'll kickstart this conversation with my guests, of course, joining us virtually via Skype. I'll see you after this time out. Join us again. Welcome back. If you just joined us, this is The Conversation. We're reaching you from KAFTAN's television studio here in the nation's capital, Abuja. I promised you that it's going to be a very interesting, educating, and enlightening edition of the show. My guest on the show today, I have two guests, and first one is Dr. Christine Sequenzia. She is co-chair International Religious Freedom Campaign to eliminate blasphemy and apostasy laws. It's great to have you on the show today, ma'am.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a great honor to be here.
Likewise. All right, so our next guest on the show today is Soraya Deen. She is the founder, Muslim Women Speakers. It's great to have you today, again, in the show today, ma'am.
Absolutely, likewise. Glad to be here.
Great. All right, now let's start with you, Dr. Christine. What exactly is causing the Syrian refugee crisis, like in the Middle East and North Africa, that's MENA region? What exactly is the reason for it?
Well, again, thank you so much. It's such an amazing honor to be here. Nigeria holds a special place in my heart. I reside in Dallas, Texas, where we have a huge Nigerian community. Many of my friends are Nigerian, so I feel like I should have just greeted you with Haufa. And I really just love and appreciate the Nigerian people. Thank you for diving right into it. The situation in Syria, in the MENA region, Middle East, Northern Africa, is such that we see in other places around the world when violence and extremism are able to flourish. So at the International Religious Freedom Roundtable and the International Religious Freedom Secretariat, we advocate for religious freedom and freedom of belief. And so on the campaign, we've been able to have great success in sort of reaching a broader audience to sort of mitigate the violent extremism and allow people to flourish believing or not believing as they choose. And we see that in the economy, it has great reproduction as well, where we see safety and security flourish, we see civil society flourish, we see peace and stability and prosperity flourishing in communities. And so hopefully we can talk more about that throughout the conversation.
So I know that the Middle East and North Africa, that's MENA region, with more than 40 million migrants and 14 million internally displaced persons, has some of the world's longest protracted conflicts, combined with frequent natural disasters, man-made crises, and the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Now, in the Ukraine conflict has definitely added another layer of complexity. And I also know that you have traveled to over 15 countries, including the to serve refugees in the MENA region. What exactly do you do for these people, and how do you do what you do? Because I know that it can really be very overwhelming for them. How do you help them to come out of their conflict zones to find rest and comfort among strangers?
Mm-hmm. Well, that is such a great question. We could have another conversation on that question alone. So when I travel abroad and help refugees, mostly that was with the Christian Medical and Dental Association. And in that context, we would bring doctors, physicians, medications in order to serve people who were experiencing serious crises and trauma. So one of my last missions was to a country in the Middle East where 60,000 refugees were actually living outside the UN camps. And that was because either the UN camps was mostly one sect of Islam, and so there would be infighting if a different sect of somebody who was Muslim went into the camp, so they weren't welcome, and or the camps were full. So at this point, we were able to serve these refugees who were being helped by a Christian church in that region. And we would provide free medical care because these refugees live outside of the UN camps. That means they don't have work authorization. They don't have education authorization. The kids are, pulled out of school after experiencing serious trauma. They've been either forcibly removed from their home and or it's not safe for them to live in their home. And so they end up as refugees in a safe area, but without access to, job stability, education, and healthcare. So we were there to sort of provide hope to them. And so in that case, it's important to understand really what someone experiences when they go through trauma and being able to meet them right where they are, providing for basic needs and providing hope.
Mm. I also know that you also serve sex trafficking survivors in Central America. What's the worst story that you've ever had to deal with, and how do you help these people also to re-socialize? Because I know that rape, sex trafficking leaves a very huge and indelible mark on the victim's psyche, which transcend years and even decades of their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also a great question. We're seeing wonderful work in Guatemala right now. So I used to work for the International Justice Mission, and IJM's slogan is to end slavery in our lifetime. And right now there are about, they say 80 million refugees, but the people who aren't even in the refugees or internal displaced persons statistics are those women and girls and some young boys who are currently involved in the sex trade, in the slave trade. And so I had the opportunity to visit Nicaragua and to work with a place called House of Hope, Casa Esperanza in Nigeria, where we really did go right into the streets of Managua and prayed with women, provided hope, invited them to medical clinics in Nicaragua. Right now, we're seeing just a perpetual cycle generational trauma that's occurring when these crimes are allowed to flourish. So IJM works in 18 countries around the world where there are laws on the books against such casework types like they work on. So they'll work on sexual exploitation, sexual trafficking, police abuse of power, land grabbing, which is something that we see most of the time in Africa, not in Central America. But IJM will come in and help train lawyers in the local region in order to enforce the laws that are already on the books, for which these women and young girls are being exploited. And so I was able to go in several times with a medical team and provide hope and a way out of this situation for them. So women would come to House of Hope and they would understand that they were able to get free shelter, free medical care, a job, a trade. They would learn a trade and be able to open up little stores. And so it was just a wonderful experience of being able to provide hope and economic stability for women who maybe were even outside of the education system because of the laws that are not being prosecuted in those areas. But like I said, the Guatemalan president right now is making great strides and was one of the areas that is flourishing. So I would provide that example as a beacon of hope in Central America.
Great. All right, before we move to Soraya Deen, I'm going to ask you one question, and I'll take that same question to Soraya Deen. Let's talk about child marriage and even forced marriages, which is quite predominant in most countries, including Nigeria. I also know that you have forced conversion and marriage of girls in Pakistan as well. Tell us, what are the stories that you have come across, and how can this be dealt with, especially from the minority groups?
That's a great question. I had the distinct honor of speaking on a webinar with the Chingari Project and the Gold Institute, I think it was in December or January, where we highlighted the community of Sind. It's the same situation nearly that occurs in some areas of Nigeria, where you see religious groups kind of dispersing into different parts of the country, instead of being able to live pluralistically in a multi-faith way, which is what we advocate for. So in the particular region of Sindh in Pakistan, we see that the Christians actually don't have the ability to raise their voice in the government system. There's no political representation for them. And then what we're seeing is forced conversion and marriage of young girls in that area. Sindh is a predominantly Christian area, so we're under the understanding that sometimes these girls are even ripped away from their homes. And then what we see is that the laws are not being activated, they're not being imposed. So these crimes go just unprosecuted, and girls are married off to sometimes Muslim men who are even polygamists, and then forced converted into a different faith. And what we would like to see is representation for the minority community, which we understand in Pakistan is only 4% of the population. So it seems more of an uphill battle in that region than a place like Nigeria, where I believe the statistic is 54% Muslim, the rest Christian. It's almost half and half. So I think Nigeria is in a much better position to be able to provide that sort of care and integrate communities in a resilient, pluralistic way.
All right, I'll take the same question to Soraya Deen. What are your thoughts with regards to forced marriages, child marriages? We've seen these things happen, and then I've had to talk to someone, and then he told me that my religion accepts me marrying as many as I want to, regardless of who I want to. What are your thoughts on this, and how can this be annihilated?
Thank you for having me on the show again. It's really exciting, and we're talking about some very relevant, urgent, and important topics for women and girls. In Nigeria, we know the Federal Child Rights Act, adapted to the Nigerian law, bans child marriage. But nevertheless, child marriage takes place. And the reason, I believe, is girls are frequently married off as a way to lessen the economic burden of their families. So no matter what the reason, and we see in Nigeria the difference in what happens in the Northeast is where it promotes child marriage, and the South is a different story. But the bottom line is we have to remember children need books, they don't need husbands. So we need to have a campaign in every city and state and call on people to really stand up to this, because a child who's married to a husband is raped, to an older man is raped every day. That's the fact. So what are my thoughts? I have a daughter who is 19, and I'm highly invested in this topic of fighting against child marriage. And it should be a national campaign in every country. But sadly, in countries like Bangladesh and some Muslim majority countries, there is child marriage. And particularly in Nigeria, we know, as I said before, it is to ease the economic burden. We have met many Nigerian women working in Northeast Nigeria. They make it a goal to give their child in marriage as a child. So how can we interrupt those thoughts and provide some level of equipping them and giving them some economic sustenance is critical to explore as solutions.
So if we're looking for solutions, probably from the law, what exactly do we do? If someone tells you that my religion accepts the fact that I can marry whoever I want to marry, but then what can the law do in this regard, making them understand that a child needs a pen and not a penis?
Yeah, we know, and Zaima, Annabel, that religion has been used and misused by people, by religious actors, and particularly by the patriarchy. Nowhere in the Quran does it say that it promotes child marriage. Nowhere. And then during the time of the Prophet, of course, Muslims have to deal with this issue head on. Yes, the Prophet was married to Aisha, and they debate her age, but also the Prophet was married to Khadija, who was 25 years older. So I like to see men who will first marry a woman who's 25 years older and then marry some young little girl, not a little girl, some young girl whom they are justifying as they have the right to marry, which is not true. And we have to also understand that what happened in this world 1400 years ago is not contextually relevant today. We have come a long way. We don't ride camels anymore. We have aeroplanes, we have buses, we have the internet. So how can we hold on to some law, not even a law, a tradition or a custom, and say that it is legal? It has to be challenged within the community.
All right, tell us about the International Religious Freedom and what they are all about. What are the activities and how are they able to impact on the lives of people globally?
Sure, I can question.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the International Religious Freedom Summit is an event that occurs in Washington, D.C. It brings together about 40 different countries, diplomats, and many different faith leaders in order to build cohesion where we are exclusionists in what we believe in our faiths, but we're inclusionist in that we unite under our commonalities. And so we have understood that when we get people in the same room, sometimes those unspoken barriers are just broken down when we become in relationship with one another, where we're allowed to unite under our commonalities, under really human dignity. And so the International Religious Freedom Charter basically adheres to the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which proclaims everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes the freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others and in public or private, to manifest his or her religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. And that Article 18 is something that is codified in international law, to which Nigeria is a co-signer.
And also to add, I think in the United States, we recognize the fact that all conflict, most conflict, foundational to most conflict is the lack of religious freedom. So the point to emphasize here is the laws don't protect a religion, but it protects the people to practice a religion. So when we talk about religious freedom, I always talk about religious responsibility. Not only in Nigeria, in all parts of the world, we are demanding for freedom to practice. But what about our obligation and the responsibility towards practicing it in a way that it does not infringe on human rights and the dignities of other people? It goes hand in hand. So at the International Religious Freedom Roundtable, and we know Christine is the Vice President for International Outreach, we do tremendous work, and we are opening up religious freedom roundtables all over the world, and we are encouraging people to really not only demand that they have the freedom, but to ensure that others have it too.
Okay, so I hear you say
and not only religion, I must quickly add freedom of thought, freedom of religion or belief. In order for somebody to believe in something, there should be freedom. Not everybody needs to be religious. There are very nice, kind people who are great humanists who don't have a religion. So how are we going to accommodate their thought is also critical when we talk about freedom of religion or belief.
Okay, so here is talk about practicing religion, and you should do it in a way that you respect other people's religion. So how do you respect other people's religion when, especially in, say, let's use, for example, in Nigeria, the one that happened recently with the girl in Sokoto State, where she made a statement and then it didn't go down well with some people. They felt that it was blasphemy. So according to her, she felt it wasn't blasphemy at the time. So how do you speak or react or act in a way that you respect other people's religion and their whatever they believe in?
I think blasphemy is very common. Blasphemy laws are implemented and enforced in Muslim majority countries. And if you look at the types of governments that enforce those blasphemy laws, they are highly authoritarian and dictatorial. As a Muslim, I have a deeper responsibility and go and explore where is this claim coming from. So there are two issues here that we need to address. One is, does the Quran authorize and sanctify blasphemy? And it absolutely does not. But what the Quran does say is it curses and says there will be humiliation hereafter for those who speak ill of Allah or if they find fault with the Prophet. So the Quran curses them and then promises of a humiliation hereafter. And nowhere does it say that we need to imprison people, that we need to kill people, that we need to burn people's homes, and that we need to disrupt human life this way. It doesn't say that. But it is being practiced, as I said, in authoritarian regimes. So I think we have to go back to the homes and see what type of conversations are we having around the dinner table. Are we teaching the children the right values? Are we teaching the children culture and tradition, or are we teaching the children a real Islam? So that is my part of my work towards the Muslim community. And I think Islam does not call for any kind of death and imprisonment for blasphemy.
At what point did we get that disconnect where people now start reading the Holy Quran or reading the Holy Bible differently and interpreting it differently to people, especially their children? And at what point did we get that disconnect?
Oh, I think it's adapting culture into the religion. And then also, let's not forget, Saudi Arabia has printed millions of Qurans and has disseminated it into poorer countries with large Muslim populations. Like in Sri Lanka, I'm from Sri Lanka, we have certain passages in the Quran printed in Saudi Arabia that calls for death and punishment and all of that. So again, this goes back to the time from where these books are originating, and we human beings, we rational beings, we have a responsibility here to compare and contrast other books of faith and learn from that. We don't need to open ourselves into being brainwashed. I feel if any religion does not conform to kindness, compassion, and common sense, we have to really question that theology, that part of the theology. And people have failed to do that because they have been told, in my culture, I know this, I come from the Muslim communities, that we have to absolutely listen to the top-down theology that is being preached.
Right, and it might be one of the main reasons why we do have international laws that create international human standards for honoring human dignity. This is how we live together on earth. You asked the question of, when did this happen? When did the theology change where it turned into something that was violent, whether we see Islamic extremism or we see, Christian nationalism in the United States. And I mean, I have 2 degrees in theology, and it didn't take those to understand that the fall of man, I'm a Christian, right? So the fall of man occurs in the very first book of the Bible, in Genesis. We see, we see Adam and Eve falling to their sin. And at that point, fast forward to the New Testament, that's where we see Jesus coming to save everyone from their sins. So really, what I'm trying to say is that it's human nature to both want to honor other populations, but also to sin. And that's why I believe as a Christian that continuing to ask for forgiveness from the Lord, asking for his salvation, allows me to be able to live with the fruits of the Spirit. We see the fruits of the Spirit in the book of Galatians, which are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, forbearance, and long suffering. And so those are the fruits of the Spirit. So when we see a Christianity that doesn't represent love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and long suffering, then we're really acting outside of Scripture. And so I also wanted to sort of comment on your earlier question. I believe you were talking about the case of Deborah Samuel.
Yes.
And that's a case that we've been following very closely on the campaign to eliminate blasphemy and apostasy laws. We actually, Soraya and I and a group of about 10 advocates that were multidisciplinary, multi-faith advocates, had an opportunity to go to the United Nations, and we were honored to be joined by 2 Nigerians on that trip. We had Kola Alapini on that trip with us, and Kola is an international human rights attorney who's advocating for another blasphemy case, which we can talk about in a minute. But we did raise the issue of Deborah Samuel's case with the Human Rights Committee, the third committee representative inside the Nigerian mission there in New York City in September, and we asked them to sign on to 2 resolutions that we were advocating on, which were to condemn the death penalty for blasphemy or apostasy. Now, it's my understanding that Nigeria doesn't have apostasy laws, and so we're very grateful for that. But on the other end, the Constitution, as I understand it, upholds a freedom of religion or belief. However, blasphemy laws, are in contradiction to the Constitution. So in Deborah's case, she was a student. She was in her 2nd year of college studying economics, and it was a WhatsApp group that was specifically designed for talking about school assignments. And she had made a comment. Now, she lives in a Muslim majority area, I believe, in the northeastern part of Nigeria. And she said something about, she hopes that she does well in Jesus' name on her tests. And for that comment, she was stoned to death and then set ablaze, set on fire by a mob. That whole incident was caught on videotape, and to my knowledge, no one has been brought to account for her murder. But the Constitution upholds someone being held to account for her murder. But the blasphemy laws are in contradiction to that. So what we would like to see is Nigeria upholding their Constitution. And advocating for not only Deborah, but Yaha, Sharif Aminu, and others who were held on death row for blasphemy laws.
All right, let's go to a quick break, and when we return, we'll continue this conversation. Clearly, we have so much to unbundle from this conversation. We'll continue this conversation with Dr. Christine and Soraya Deen. I will see you after this time out. Join us again. So if we're looking for solutions, probably from the law, what exactly do we do? If someone tells you that my religion accepts the fact that I can marry whoever I want to marry, but then what can the law do in this regard, making them understand that a child needs a pen and not a penis?
Yeah, we know, and Zaima, Annabel, that religion has been used and misused by people, by religious actors, and particularly by the patriarchy. Nowhere in the Quran does it say that it promotes child marriage. Nowhere. And then during the time of the Prophet, of course, Muslims have to deal with this issue head on. Yes, the Prophet was married to Aisha, and they debate her age, but also the Prophet was married to Khadija, who was 25 years older. So I like to see men who will first marry a woman who's 25 years older and then marry some young little girl, not a little girl, some young girl whom they are justifying as they have the right to marry, which is not true. And we have to also understand that what happened in this world 1400 years ago is not contextually relevant today. We have come a long way. We don't ride camels anymore. We have airplanes, we have buses, we have the internet. So how can we hold on to some law, not even a law, a tradition or a custom, and say that it is legal? It has to be challenged within the community.
If you just joined us, this is The Conversation. We're reaching you from KAFTAN's television studio here in the nation's capital, Abuja. If you just joined us, you've actually missed out on a whole lot, but then you can still join on the show today, as we have our two guests joining us virtually. Dr. Christine Sequenzia, she is co-chair International Religious Freedom Campaign to Eliminate Blasphemy and Apostasy Laws. And we also have Soraya Deen, who is the founder, Muslim Women Speakers. It's great to have you again joining us today.
Likewise, thank you.
Great.
Yes,
all right, so I'm going to continue with you, Dr. Christine, because you talked about Deborah Samuel's case before we went on that short break. Now I'm going to ask you, you were going to even tell us a story about, I think, Ummi. But then, personally, I will ask you, what sort of resolutions does the IRF come up with or legislate to eliminate a death penalty for religious blasphemy and apostasy laws?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's a great question. So our campaign to eliminate blasphemy and apostasy laws brings together a multi-faith, multidisciplinary, global group of advocates that all advocate for the International Religious Freedom Charter, which really upholds the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18, which advocates for freedom of religion or belief based upon the innate human dignity of each person. And so our goal over the last year and a half, 2 years, has been to pass 2 resolutions in the United Nations, which we saw pass with flying colors, and we were able to add a religion or belief language to both of those resolutions. So first, there was a moratorium on the death penalty resolution that went through during the United Nations General Assembly. In that particular resolution, we saw 131 missions, countries' missions, human rights advocates voting in favor of that a resolution. That particular language advocates for a human right. It doesn't specifically say for religious freedom, but we, as defined, a human right is defined in Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as being a freedom of religion or belief. So I think we got what we wanted in that case. And then most importantly, there was a resolution also on extrajudicial killing. That's a big fancy word, which basically means what happened to Deborah Samuel. And so in Deborah Samuel's case, she was killed by the death penalty for exercising her basic human right, which is supposed to be upheld by the Nigerian constitution, to pray in Jesus' name for a favor on her school test. Now, in that case, she wasn't murdered by government representatives. She did not experience the death penalty as a result of her crimes in legal court. It was actually mob violence that killed Deborah Samuel. But like I said, the Constitution of Nigeria upholds her ability to believe as she would like. And so what the international community is advocating for in voting for that resolution. So we saw 126 countries voting in favor of that resolution, which did add freedom of religion or belief specific language to that particular piece of text. We saw for the first time Ghana, Liberia, and even Myanmar vote in favor of that resolution. And so in Deborah's case, what that means in the international law system and as well as in country is that people who killed Deborah for exercising her faith should be held to trial. They should be held to account for her death, for her stoning, and for being burned alive. And I think in this day and age of technology, where we even have evidence showing what happened to her, it's time, and it's really, honestly, a great opportunity for Nigerian incoming President Tinubu to really uphold Nigeria's constitution and to decrease those blasphemy laws, which are in contradiction to that. So I think finally in the campaign, what I would say is that we understand repealing blasphemy laws as a whole across the globe is going to be, an upend of societies as they have been functioning for quite some time. But what we would like to say is that at least eliminating the death penalty for such crimes should be low-hanging fruit, a great starting point for that. Now, Nigeria abstained from both of those resolutions, which we were not excited about. Number one, I said we did have a chance to talk to Nigerian foreign mission representatives. We had a great conversation with them. And so we would just encourage them and the administration in these times to uphold the Nigerian Constitution and protect people's religious freedom.
I want to quickly add, thank you, Christine. So Leah Sheribu is a tragic case of blasphemy gone terribly to impact lives of people. And in Nigeria, I see it doesn't stop there. We know Mubarak Bala, Yahya Sharif Aminu. This is a continuing problem. When Christina and I went to the United Nations to submit, to get support from member countries to at least, it's like a triage appeal we have to make. We can't even say get rid of blasphemy at once because no country is willing to. Now we are saying begging with a begging bowl, at least get rid of the death penalty. And even there I realized was that countries have vested geopolitical interests. So we have countries looking straight in our face and saying, we are with you, but we can't support this resolution openly. So my message, I work within the advocacy paradigm. Yes, it is powerful, it's necessary. It is also for us to mobilize the grassroots. Imagine thousands of Nigerians standing up for their fellow citizens and for within their communities and saying this is wrong. This doesn't reflect well not only in the community, it desecrates Islam and it minimizes Nigerian image in the world, because year after year the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom designates Nigeria as a country of particular interest, particular concern. That is a serious designation, because that means they have studied the religious freedom violations that are taking place in Nigeria, and then they designate each country.
Even though at some point it was upturned, though.
Sorry?
Even though at some point it was changed.
Yes. And then I told you the geopolitical interests are very wide and deep, and it is kind of self-centered. So who are the people who have the mandate and the responsibility to protect their democracy? I think it's the people. This morning we were on a call with our president, Nadine Mayenza. She said this beautiful quote: when people create something, they preserve it. So my question is, what are the Nigerian people creating in terms of religious freedom? Because I don't believe my God, which is Allah, or my prophet Muhammad, they need anybody to be killed in order to advance my faith. That is a tragedy, and I, as a Muslim woman, I have an agency to my Creator. I fight those inhuman practices.
All right, so I know that you work with or in conjunction with the United Nations, but now there have been arguments with regards to the activities of the United Nations. Some people argue the fact that they're not living up to the expectations, or they're failing in their directives on human rights. Would you agree with that?
I think we are in a very desperate state. There's no other international body other than the United Nations we have to go to. And there has been great work that has also been accomplished. But we are also seeing the world over, there's a lot of internal country-based politics that the United Nations can't get involved in directly in a way to say change that law. It is up for that country and for those people. So there's only so much the United Nations can do. If I love my country, I'm going to begin with the end in mind. What kind of a country do I want my child to live in? To kill one another, or to love one another? That's the question people have to ask. So yes, answering your question, Annabel, United Nations power is limited. It is not unlimited. So it has a lot of constraints.
All right, awesome. Let's take this question to Dr. Christine. Now, if their freedom of association, because you talked about that especially from the Nigerian Constitution, like the Nigerian Constitution guarantees that, and when guarantees the fact that you have the freedom to associate, and then freedom of speech, freedom of movement and all. But when you go to the religious angle, the Bible, for instance, which talked about giving to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God, and also states that you cannot worship God and mammon. So it means that the Bible accepts the fact that everyone cannot be a Christian. You can decide what you want to be and where you want to go through. So there shouldn't be, or they should not be coerced. Even Jesus never forced anyone to his side. If you recall, when Jesus reprimanded violence by immediately and miraculously healing the servant Malchus' ear that was chopped off by Simon Peter. Same thing for the Muslims. The great prophet never supported violence of any sort. Now, he never forced anyone to believe in his religious affinity. So why do we have this blasphemy and especially apostasy laws, even though, thank God, like you said, it doesn't happen in Nigeria, but other ones that happens? If we are following the path of these great leaders and teachers, why aren't we following it to the teeth? And where did these discrepancies or disconnect creep in? I also take the same question to Soraya, but I'd like you to share your thoughts on that first.
Well, that's a great question. I think from a Christian perspective, to answer, we really have to look at the example, like you mentioned, of Christ and how Christ shared love and hope with people around him. Like you said, he never coerced people around him. He was a prophet that advocated healing and wholeness, and was the person sitting at the table with all of those who were outcast in society. Christ's example of being a follower of God, a Christian in community, draws us into close relationship with people who are most different from us, those who are outcast by society. And so that's sort of the message and the hope that I bring, that I would advocate for us to live, like I said, in pluralistic, resilient communities. And I did want to comment on something that you mentioned, the countries of particular concern list. We did see a couple years ago, the United States, in fact, removed Nigeria from the CPC list, which was a huge movement in Nigeria. And then recently, like Soraya mentioned, how do you affect really local communities in Nigeria now that they've been removed from the CPC list? Well, we'd like to see community advocates being able to live in peace with one another, to recognize our differences, can be exclusionist in what they believe, but all come together underneath our commonality. Now, we also advocate with and work in close conjunction with the United States Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Rashad Hussain. And Ambassador Hussain and his associates actually sent a letter advocating for CPC redesignation in Nigeria because of some of these violations of blasphemy laws that we've been seeing in Yaha Sharif Aminu's case, in Deborah Samuel's case, and others. And so I think, like I said, it's a great opportunity for the incoming electorate and for the Supreme Court, really, to uphold its constitution in Yaha Aminu Sharif's case.
All right, so I'll take the same questions to Soraya Deen. I'd like to get your thoughts on that, because I recall that the last conversation we had, you told us about in places like the United States, you now have female imams. And I told a friend about it, and she was surprised to hear that. So I'm sure she wants to hear how it's been so far.
Oh, I think I want to also add to what Christine said first, that there was a time when, yes, Islam was spread, and that was through means that are not non-violent. And there was a time when Christianity spreads also through crusades. But we have now evolved as a human species. I think there should be no compulsion in religion. And if you're going to advance Jesus's message, and as I talk about Prophet Muhammad, he also mandated to every Muslim that you are responsible for 70 people in your community. So the question that we need to ask is, are we taking that responsibility seriously and implementing it? And then about female imams, There's nowhere in the Quran it says women can't be imams. So what has happened, Annabel, is that Islam has become a hadith-based Islam. We know that these hadiths, the statements and the practices of the Prophet were recorded about 200-300 years after him. So today, in most Muslim communities, we are advancing that, not what was said in our scripture, what is said in the Quran. So we need to go back to our basics and really study the Quran. It does never say in any place a woman can't be an imam. Woman can't be a leader. In fact, when Prophet Muhammad received the first revelation, he came to his wife Khadija. He was shivering, and it was she who counseled him. You know? And then his uncle never embraced Islam. So we have instances and stories where diversity was foundational to Islam. But today we see that it is slowly eroding. And why shouldn't a woman be able to preach and teach the word of God? Because why? Because patriarchal structures have told women what they are, what they can do, and what they can't do. So in effect, what functional distinctions of the 14th century, the 7th century have now come to define the role of a woman. And we women have to break free from that. Nobody is going to tell us, hey, do you want some power? Here's some power. No, power is for us to organize and then be seen and be heard. Because what about my agency to my Creator? He's going to ask me when I meet him, what did you do with the gifts, talents, and abilities I gave you? He's going to ask me that question, and I'm responsible to answer. When somebody is desecrating my faith, I have to speak up. When somebody is misrepresenting my faith, I have to speak up. When somebody is taking away the freedom and the rights of women, I have to speak up.
All right, even as we begin to round up, now I'm doing my own part of organizing this conversation, even though the connection is not being friendly, but regardless, we still send the message across. So how do we put the parents, the religious leaders, other people in this roundtable to make these discussions? How do we get them informed so that we can effect that change immediately?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for asking it. And I know we're coming to an end here. So I really appreciate you, Annabel, and your heart for this issue and to share the message. At the International Religious Freedom Secretariat, we stand up three things. One, our local summits, which build local secretariats, which build local roundtables. Right now we have 22 roundtables in different regions across the globe, and we hope to have one in Nigeria soon. At that point, we would ask religious leaders to all come together for a summit to learn more about how we can live in harmony and peace with one another, respecting each other's human dignity, and really just advocating for each other's right for freedom of religion or belief. We've seen great things happening in Kazakhstan and other places around the globe. And so we would invite you to visit irfsecretariat.org, irfsummit.org to get involved in the movement.
All right,
I think bottom line, Gandhi reminds us that very
Go ahead,
powerfully during the colonization, when the India was being colonized, people called him for violence, and he said, I will die for a cause, but I'm not willing to kill for one. So it is such a moment where we have to really reflect on how we are being seen as Muslims. I'll talk from the perspective of Muslims. If we are unable to advance in our readings and teachings and theologies, God's mercy for mankind, I think we have to rethink what we are talking about. And I want to understand and acknowledge that this is a highly polarized conversation, Annabel. There's one half who wants to preserve the continuity because they don't want to dilute the Islam they know. And I respect that because they come from a good place, but it is flawed. And then there's the other half who are looking for change, for a progressive, for a contextual way of understanding and engaging our people. So I respect them too. And is that flawed? We might have some flaws in the system. So we need to come together and talk about it. And finally, every thought and every practice we advance the advocate must advance humanity. If I'm going to kill you and say my religion mandates that is inherently wrong. There's no debate on that. We have to advance human dignity.
All right, so Dr. Soraya Deen, looking back to all the years of your work and activism, both on liberation and all, and what exactly do you see? Do you see is there work in progress aside the work that the advocacies that you do on the global scene with IRF? How can individuals, parents, like we've said, lend their voices? And do you see that is there change? Do we see change happening soon?
Yeah, I see, Annabel, we have to really recognize it's a David and Goliath situation. And we are the Davids. Yes? So we can't lose hope. So I see powerful possibilities, especially I work with in Nigeria. We need to bring in more people. More people have to call on their governments, call on their elected officials, call on their community leaders. And we have to shift the culture, and cultures have been shifted. If you look at the civil rights movement, we have enough of examples, but it's hard work. The question is not the skills, it's the will. People have to really commit making this change happen, and yes, there is hope.
Great. Thank you so much, Soraya Deen. It's been a wonderful time. In fact, it's always a pleasure having these talks with you. Thank you so much for your time with us, Soraya Deen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Christine, that she's co-chair International Religious Freedom Campaign to eliminate blasphemy and apostasy laws. It's been a wonderful time having this discussion with you. Like, we could just go on and on, but time is quite really not our friend. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Oh,
thank you, and
we hope to come back soon.
Great.
And to answer your question, there is hope. I gave a speech in June of last year where we advocated for 10 countries to remove the death penalty for blasphemy. And since that time, we've seen the UAE even come off that list. So yes, there is hope and things are happening. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. All right, viewers, that's where we end this conversation. We have been chatting with Dr. Christine Sequenzia. She is co-chair International Religious Freedom Campaign to eliminate blasphemy and apostasy laws. And we also had Soraya Deen, who is founder Muslim Women Speakers. And it's been a wonderful time here on the conversation. So regardless, if you're a parent, you're a guardian, a religious leader, we need to put hands together to ensure that we end blasphemy laws, whatever blasphemy in any way. And please do as much as possible, try as much as possible rather, to respect each other's laws, respect each other's religion, and don't go against people's religion or their beliefs. Their beliefs, their religion, their food, their culture is who they are. So do not disrespect them or disrespect their beliefs. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Annabel Orji. God bless you and yours, and God bless Nigeria.